You're listening to the Charles Aris podcast, the future of biostimulants, innovation, investment, and industry growth. In this episode, members of our agriculture recruiting team are joined by David Hiltz, President and Principal Consultant at Hiltz BioAg Consulting, and Manel Cervera, International Consultant of Biologicals at DunhamTrimmer, to explore one of the fastest growing segments of agricultural biologicals, biostimulants. Together, they discuss what biostimulants are, how they differ from other biological products, and the role they play in helping growers improve nutrient efficiency and overall performance. They also examine the regulatory landscape, emerging innovation trends, market growth drivers, and the talent and investment strategies shaping the future of the industry. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to the Charles Aris podcast. I'm Nichole Hammond, Senior Associate Practice Leader, representing the agriculture and food practice at Charles Aris Executive Search. And I'm excited to be joined today by David Hiltz, President and Principal Consultant at Hiltz BioAg Consulting. David is also co-chair of the Biostimulant Innovation Committee of the Biological Products Industry Alliance, and he and I both serve on the board of BPIA. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Nichole.
I'm also joined by Manel Cervera, International Consultant of Biologicals with DunhamTrimmer. Thanks for joining us, Manel.
Hi, Nichole. Pleasure.
And finally, I'm joined by my colleague, Eric Spell, Vice President at Charles Aris. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Nichole. Glad to be here.
So today we're going to take some time to talk about biostimulants. We're really drilling in to understand what is a biostimulant and what makes it different from other biological products. How do they fit in the market? What's happening in the regulatory landscape and in the marketplace, especially in terms of innovation and M&A activity? And finally, what are some of the challenges biostimulant companies are facing, including hiring for key leadership roles? And so before we dive in, I'd love to take a couple of minutes to give our listeners a further introduction to each of you and your companies. David, can you just introduce yourself briefly and Hiltz BioAg Consulting?
Sure. Thanks, Nichole. So my name is David Hiltz. And as Nichole mentioned, I'm the owner and chief consultant at Hiltz BioAg Consulting. Hiltz BioAg Consulting is a relatively new company to the space, but I've been around for quite some time. I had about a 30-year career with one of the leading biostimulant companies, Acadian Plant Health, where I served in the research and development team and in the regulatory affairs team for many years. My new company, again, is building on my expertise that I learned and guided Acadian through. We work to help companies that are navigating the plant biostimulant space, and my experience as a scientific advisor, I offer guidance on the research, development, manufacturing, and then ultimately the global registration of plant biostimulants.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And Manel, can you tell us about your background and DunhamTrimmer, please?
Yes, I've been working in biostimulant companies, Spanish companies working at global level, developing biostimulant markets in many geographies around the world, always in sales and marketing management positions. And I entered DunhamTrimmer 9 years ago as business development. I become a partner, and today I'm managing partner, and I support my team as a chief commercial officer. About DunhamTrimmer, we are a strategic consulting, business intelligence, and market research firm, focus exclusively on agricultural biologicals and value-added fertilizers. We are a team of senior professionals with long executive and operational experience across all the biological space, and we support companies in the space on any strategical decisions as well as on market information.
Excellent. Thank you, Manel. And Eric, would you mind reintroducing yourself and Charles Aris to our listeners?
Sure. Charles Aris Executive Search has been around for 57 years. We're one of the leading executive boutique search firms in the United States. Our firm overall, we're industry agnostic. We work in a lot of different industry sectors, but last year our firm placed just under 300 executives across the U.S. Our team specifically, Nichole, as you know, we have worked with a number of crop protection, crop nutrition companies with biologicals in recent years, either publicly traded companies, and we've done quite a bit of work in recent years with a number of private equity backed portfolios in the biological space. So our team is delighted to be a part of this podcast today.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. So I'd love to just really start at the beginning and lay some groundwork for our listeners here and just start with, what is a biostimulant? David, would you mind giving us some background there?
Sure, Nichole. So plant biostimulants, the term is somewhat new, but also has been used off and on, I would say, for coming into about 70 years. In the 40s and 50s, there were professors that were referring to substances that were biogenic stimulants. They were recognized that they were substances that in small quantities would basically help plants grow, which was kind of a broad term. And then that term continued to be used off and on, but in the 1990s, you really started to see development and use of this biostimulant term more often, where you had Zhang and Schmidt, for example, in 1997, that said, biostimulants are materials that in very small quantities promote plant growth, which was still fairly broad and could have meant a lot of different things. The term really started to kind of gain acceptance, I guess, in the early 2000s, where you had the emergence of the recognition that there was a category of crop inputs that were not crop protection, nor were they really fertilizers, but they were important parts of agronomic inputs that dealt with areas of supporting the plant growth that neither of those other two substances did. And that's when you first started to see the definition of biostimulants emerge. You saw Dr. Desjardins, for example, in and around 2012, who talked about plant biostimulants being a substance or material with the exception of nutrients and pesticides. So he made it clear that they were not fertilizers, they weren't crop protection. And when you applied them to either the seed, the plant, or the soil, they had the capacity to modify the physiological processes of the plants in a way that then provided benefits to the plants so they could grow better. And that kind of started the whole, I guess, definition of plant biostimulant that we see that has emerged today.
Excellent. Thank you. And Manel, are there different types of biostimulants currently? Different types of products that people consider biostimulants?
Yeah, broadly speaking, we used to start dividing the biostimulants between what we call microbial and non-microbial base. And inside the non-microbial base, there are really a lot of different substances and actives, but the major categories include what we call seaweed extracts, amino acids and protein hydrolysates, humic and fulvic substances or acids, and also increasingly more defined organic molecules. But those are the main categories we can find in a big share of the products that we can find in the market.
Fantastic. And has there been a changing perception in the marketplace of biostimulants, do you think? Are there any misconceptions that need to be debunked?
I think there's been obviously, as I mentioned, in the last 20 years, we see a real acceptance of this category of products where regulators, growers, industry in general recognized that there was a category of crop input that didn't fit well into the various regulatory frameworks that you see around the world. You had basically, up until the last 20, a product was either considered a fertilizing material or it was considered a crop protection product. Fertilizing material in that you're providing, nutrients or micronutrients to the crop, or you're providing organic matter to the soil. Crop protection, the idea that you are applying a product that helps it overcome pests or disease or insect pressures, things like that. But there was this category of products that was somewhere in the middle of those two that was neither providing fertility nor helping with pest resistance. Instead, it was helping plants better use the fertility that was applied through fertilizers. And it was also addressing an area of plant challenges to plant growth that is abiotic stretch, which rather than the pest pressure that comes from disease and insects, it is instead the pressure in the crop that comes from things like drought or chill or salinity. And that was an area that, for many years, companies somewhat ignored. And only recently have they realized that the actual loss or suppression of yield that you can get from a crop growth is greater to abiotic stress than it is to biotic stress. And yet growers have many options in biotic stress, but until recently, no one was really providing solutions for abiotic stress. And that's where the biostimulant industry has really come into focus, especially with some of the changes that have come due to climate because of human activity and the stress that is then putting on the global food production systems.
That's really helpful. And so I think it'd also be interesting to talk, how do biostimulants fit in the broader biologicals picture? Where do they fit in that category?
Well, I mean, biostimulants, one of the sentences, and David did a very, very thoughtful definition. When I was developing markets, which a few decades ago, the biostimulants were quite new substances there. I always say that biostimulants were products designed to improve plant performance. So, and that's related to all what David said before on nutrient use efficiency, abiotic stress tolerance, crop quality, and overall resilience of the crop, and making the physiological performance and resilience more efficient. And that's where biostimulants really fit. On the biostimulant category, particularly when we talk about most of the microbial-based biostimulants, many of them have been designed and developed for a nutrient use efficiency, as could be the N-fixing microbial products for leguminous, and actually more recently for other kind of crops. Some people refers to this category as biofertilizers. So sometimes you may listen to that as a different category. We in DunhamTrimmer included inside as a subcategory on the biostimulants, but still in many places in the industry you can find it as a separate category. And then, of course, I think already David alluded to that, the biocontrol products would be those that really support the plant to be protected against biotic stress. So the biotic stress versus abiotic stress would be the clear line between the two categories, in my opinion.
That's really helpful context. Thank you. And David, as you gave some of the history and, the growth of biostimulants over the years, let's talk some about the recent innovation and what kinds of trends and innovations are you seeing now in biostimulants?
I think one of the biggest innovations and trends we're seeing now in biostimulants, Nichole, is this movement toward, I guess, what we call a second or even even a third generation of plant biostimulants, where, as Manel talked about earlier, a lot of the biostimulants, the first generation biostimulants that were in the market, were products that were, I guess, mixtures of a variety of things. You had a lot of seaweed extracts or plant extracts or microbial consortia and things like that. But you didn't have this defined mode of action necessarily, because the actual products themselves, while they did provide the benefits that we've talked about for plant biostimulants, because there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of compounds in some of these plant extracts or seaweed extracts, it wasn't well identified exactly how they were working. There was a fair bit of science done to show that they did work, and a lot of field studies to show that they did work. But with crop protection, for example, in most cases, companies can go in and give a very, very detailed explanation of how the product is working. Biostimulants were challenged in that a lot of the companies didn't know exactly what was in the product necessarily, and didn't know exactly the mode of action of how they're working. What I'm seeing more recently is, in this newer generation of plant biostimulants, is the identification of individual compounds, either in some of the extract products, or even purification of some of those actual compounds, and then using those in very targeted systems where the researchers for these companies can go in and identify exactly what pathways in the plant are being stimulated and how the actual products are manifesting some of the benefits we're seeing for plant biostimulants, be it, through improved nutrient uptake or stimulation of some of the pathways against abiotic stresses. And that allows these companies then to be able to go to the market with almost like a crop protection type of an explanation, and show the science of exactly how their products are working. And that will improve the overall ability of companies to then use those products in a much more targeted way. That was one of the challenges I think we've seen with plant biostimulants is there's been some question of, well, do they work all the time? And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I would argue a lot of that is not that the product is working or not. It's knowing how to use the product, the right timing, the right placement, maybe even the right coformulant in there to actually see the true benefit of the active molecules that are present in the plant biostimulant. That's where I think we're starting to see companies now produce much more targeted, I would say, biostimulant products rather than ones that just generally help with a variety of different crop challenges.
David, Manel, and Nichole, you feel free to answer this as well. Our listeners include people that maybe aren't as familiar with the agricultural space and the landscape. Sometimes it's venture capital personnel, and sometimes it's private equity. So my question would be, could you talk to maybe consumers in the audience? What do they need to know about these biostimulants versus traditional products, and what does that mean in the grocery store?
We've been, in fact, during the last 10 years, this industry has captured a lot of interest from private equity and investment. And we ourselves in DunhamTrimmer have been involved in many of the key due diligence process of key deals and M&A processes. And one of the main reasons is when you look at the increasing drought pressure, fertilizer efficiency challenges, soil-related stress conditions, contamination, degradation, or the climate volatility impacting agriculture globally, you quickly understand why these technologies have become strategically relevant. I mean, they really impact on the food production, and this is a key topic. And also, they perfectly well with the key drivers which we see at global level in terms of movement towards higher sustainability requirements in companies and production systems, higher population that needs to be fit and will need to be fit in the future, and also bigger piece of this population with a higher income that they want to consume more. So we need to keep production sustainable while the soil and water resources are limited, scarce, and in some cases of lower quality. So you can imagine that products that help plant to improve their performance, that they make crops more resilient to any of those conditions while keeping quality and production at the good levels, and they really fit with the measured trends. So for the reasons that David already explained, and with more science-based companies doing good research, doing more specific things, more targeted effects, more robustness on efficacy, investors saw medium long term probably big opportunity on involving and getting inside this system, which of course they can support a lot also to those companies to really go to the next level and really be able to perform and develop these more targeted products that David alluded before.
You know, one of the things we've talked about in previous podcasts is, helping investors understand the time that it takes for an agricultural company to bring a product to market and some of the regulatory challenges and hurdles that must be overcome. And so, David, can you talk a little bit about where biostimulants fit in that regulatory landscape and, what are some of the challenges companies are facing there?
Sure, Nichole. That's one, as I mentioned earlier in our discussions here, one of the big challenges for plant biostimulants was once it was recognized that this category of product was available out there, it was trying to then get the product to market in a compliant way. And as I mentioned, for many years, there really was only two paths to market for agricultural inputs. It was either considered a fertilizing material or a fertilizer where you were supplying nutrients, or you were a crop protection product where you were treating pests and diseases. And, the challenge of having a product that was somewhere in between obviously meant that you were either masquerading as one or the other and not able to make the full claims of your product because they really didn't necessarily fit into those categories. So in around about the same time that I mentioned that Patrick Desjardins started talking about plant biostimulants, that's when you really started to see the, industry come together and try to lobby the various regulatory agencies around the globe for the creation of appropriate categories for plant biostimulants. And we saw, the European Biostimulant Industry Council, for example, form in Europe, where they very successfully, after many years, lobbied the European Commission for the creation of a plant biostimulant regulation as a subset of a fertilizing material law there. And in 2019, we saw that publication. And that was probably the first flag in the sand, if you would say, where there was a definition of plant biostimulant entrenched in a regulation and a clear regulatory framework to market for those products. And since that's happened, we've seen around the world kind of I would almost see an outflow of new regulations that have allowed these products to get to market. And one of the biggest challenges that groups like BPIA and EBIC and others have tried to work toward is to try to get as much global harmony as we can in both the definition of plant biostimulant and then the subsequent regulation of it. So companies that are multinational and operating in different areas of the world, when they market their plant biostimulants, they can use the same type of label claims, the same type of product descriptions in one region as they use in the others. Europe was the first. In the USA, for example, we finally recently in 2023 had the Association of Plant Food Control Officials passed the beneficial substances model bill that paves the way for plant biostimulant regulation in the United States, which is another one that is obviously dear to our hearts as BPIA members.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how does adoption vary, in the US versus other countries globally?
Well, adoption differences are often more related to crop systems and agronomic realities than simply geography. For example, if we compare even inside the US, the California specialty crop segment has very different economics and management intensity compared to, let's say, broadacre row crops in the US. Both may use biostimulants, and in fact, they use very often. But the frequency of applications, the quality expectations, the return on investment thresholds, those are very different among both cropping systems. And the same happens globally. I mean, if we move outside the US, Brazil, for instance, has become extremely dynamic in biological adoption in soybean, for instance, or broadacre, because certain cropping systems and environmental conditions create a strong economic incentives. Meanwhile, there are still some regions like in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia, which still face structural limitations around value chain development, distribution, or farmers' access. Although adoption there is also accelerating quite fast.
That's great. And so, it seems to me that in order for companies to be successful in the space, it's critical that they have knowledgeable people in key roles, right? And so, Eric, can you talk a little bit about your experience and how executive search plays a role in helping companies navigate that to make sure they've got the right people in the right seats?
Well, first and foremost, when you're in executive search, you need to know the lane to which you're recruiting for. And so we've done a really extreme effort to identify all of the senior level people at the sales and marketing operational leadership space in the crop nutrition, crop protection space. There are some individuals that would rather work on the traditional side of crop inputs. And there's some people that are very passionate about sustainability, regenerative agriculture. And then you have certain individuals that if it's a private equity backed scenario, they race towards opportunities like that. And they know they're a little bit more risk averse in that sense. In other words, the equity component of a comp package is appealing to them. And then there's some people that would prefer to work more in a much less risk averse scenario. And so our team knows who those people are. We have their ear. We talk to them on a regular basis. And so we have a pretty strong network in the space. And that helps if it's a venture capital or private equity, we all know they like to move fast and they like to have a ready pool of candidates. And that's what we try to offer.
Fantastic. And so knowing all this, let's talk a little bit about the path forward for innovative biostimulants. What challenges are these companies facing today? And what do you see the path forward for companies who are already in or looking to enter this space?
I think the harmonization of global regulation, I think, is a challenge for companies right now. That's still, the idea of what type of claims you can make, what type of evidence you need in those various markets in order to meet the regulatory requirements, the mismatch in some ways, in some markets of definitions of plant biostimulant, what you can and can't say for it, I think is a bit of a challenge. I would also say I guess some of the history of plant biostimulants, where in some cases it remains this uncertainty about whether or not they work, how effective they are, given the fact that they're dealing a lot with abiotic stress. Some companies, some growers don't like to admit that their fields are under stress, even though most scientific studies would suggest that, abiotic stress is one of the greatest emerging threats to food security and ongoing food growth that's going to be required to feed the growing population. So I think, as companies that are entering the space or continuing to work in the space continue to generate more and better science and field studies to show that their products are having the effects that they're claiming that they are having, I think that will go a long way to helping to, again, establish the strong demonstration that these products are not only required, but that they are efficacious and can contribute to food security going forward.
Yeah, and Manel, I know that DunhamTrimmer recently released the Global Biostimulant Market Report, and so just curious to get your perspective on the things that has to say for the industry going forward.
Well, one of the things, of course, the reports we publish, they include a complete quantitative data on the values and the projections at region, country, even key markets and key segments levels. But one of the things we focus a lot also when we do our reports is also to explain the market dynamics, which are the forces and how they are impacting the industry today and in the coming years. And we try to see where the value is going to be created, where the challenges would be. I would say that one of the things we've been observing and links with many of the things that we mentioned today and David alluded to, due to the how most of type of substances are done, etc. I think risk of commoditization is something we need to keep in mind. And David already alluded to some of the innovation trends that are trying to drive towards other direction, and that's really something we see as a very promising space. What I would say, another thing we've been changing since the pandemic, post-pandemic periods and the volatility and uncertainty environment that it's becoming more and more common for decision makers and entrepreneurs and investors. One of the things that we see that it's becoming more challenging is also that the growth is there, the value is there, but how to capture that value is becoming more challenging. I mean, and we've seen that innovation is important, but it seems it's not enough. We increasingly see the need of what we call in DunhamTrimmer a company market fit. I mean, in other words, technologies must fit the real farming systems, the real economics, the real operation realities at farm level. And that's something we find very challenging. Commercial execution is becoming very important as well. And this is where, Eric, regarding your question, this is where most of the talent is searched and is needed for this industry. Also, how to combine and bring and capture this value along a value chain, which in the agricultural systems is more challenging than many people could think. So those are some of the things we see coming ahead. We see growth. The growth is continuing. And there are areas, of course, which are showing some symptoms of maturity, but there are other areas and segments which are still showing very healthy, good growth, particularly if you compare to many other industries in the space.
Yeah, and to that point, Eric, I'm curious, what you're seeing in terms of, M&A activity and private equity and venture capital support, of this industry. What are you seeing as you're talking to companies out there?
Well, from a private equity standpoint, they're very thirsty for the space. It's a space that they're very much interested in. The challenge is there's not been a whole lot of deal flow. There's not been a lot of VC activity to feed the investing. So that's the challenge. But You've got a lot of family offices out there that are really interested in the space as well. So certainly a great depth of thirst and interest. And among, especially, there's this term most of us have heard about, some of us have, is impact investing. And this is a category that falls directly around that. There's a big interest in it globally. And we're seeing, Nichole, you and I at BPIA, we saw an organization that was seeking someone to help not only grow their product line here in the U.S., but globally. And some of those products now are coming from Europe or coming from international spots, making their appearance here in the States. So I think it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I definitely wanted to take a moment to plug BPIA, the Biological Products Industry Alliance, of which both David and I are board members. And I find that organization to be just incredibly helpful in terms of gathering talented, smart people who are passionate about working to advance sustainability through biological solutions. And so, I know the next annual meeting isn't until March 2027 in St. Louis, but, if folks are interested, they can also, of course, reach out to David or I anytime. But, I'm curious, what are other places or things people can do to learn more and get engaged in the conversation around biostimulants?
It's a good plug, Nichole. And the reason I say that is if you look at the success of the plant biostimulant industry, a lot of it has been driven by the recognition of biostimulant companies that currently the biostimulant market out there, and Manel can talk extensively about this, is still a relatively small piece of the agricultural pie. And while all of the companies that are working in this space are basically competing for a piece of that pie, the progressive ones recognize that by growing that piece, we all have more to compete for in that piece. So if you look at, for example, the success of EBIC in the European Union, if you look at the success of BPIA in the United States, the impacts that we're having to get, companies working together, coming together to actually try to set their competitive, tones aside for the moment, to try to work together to grow that piece of the pie and make the plant biostimulants seen as a must-have input for crop input space rather than a nice to have. If we can do that, that entire market will grow, and then those companies can then compete amongst themselves in a much larger market than what we have right now. So I think in looking for where new entrants or whatever can look for information, the great place to start are the various industry associations for plant biostimulants that you see around the world, because that's where we see real progressive work going to try to basically promote the entire industry and make it recognized as a sustainable and a credible.
So, Manel, how can folks who are interested in DunhamTrimmer's market reports on biostimulants or other topics get in touch and find that information from DunhamTrimmer?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, of course, through our website, DunhamTrimmer.com, they can contact us and see all our senior teams. We are all very involved in the industry, participate. We are invited as speakers in most of the key events occurring in the industry. So through our website or LinkedIn, they have our contacts. They can contact us, and we will be happy to support them and to share with them some of the materials we have and explain further about the products and services we offer.
Well, and then I just want to, in closing, open it up to see any final thoughts on biostimulants, the industry, the future. Any final thoughts there?
I'll jump in and I'll say I'll build on something that Eric said earlier. It's a great time for plant biostimulants, and the reason I say that is, if you look at the core inputs of crop production, we've spent hundreds of years working on plant breeding to come up with the very best varieties of crops to grow. With the Haber-Bosch process, we've spent the last, probably 70, 80 years developing fertilizers for crop nutrition and developing the 4 R's of knowing the right product at the right time and the right location, the right amount. In the last 50 years, we've had amazing growth in crop protection, where we've come up with an entire toolbox for growers to use to help overcome pests and diseases. We need plant biostimulants to become the fourth leg of that agricultural table, where the emerging challenges and the understanding that so much crop potential is lost to abiotic stress and fertilizer inefficiency, it is a great time for these products to then be able to come to market and take their rightful place alongside of these other three pillars of the food industry, and basically show that that these products can really help improve overall crop productivity in an area that up until now has been a little bit neglected, but is becoming very critical given the changes in the climate that we are seeing with some of the effects.
Manel and Eric, anything to close from your side?
Now, nothing much to add to what David say. I think that the long-term fundamentals behind biologicals and biostimulants specifically remain very strong. I think science is improving. Companies are becoming more professional, and the alignment with major agricultural challenges we are facing today is evident. So I think the real question is not whether biostimulants are needed, which I think they are needed. What we need to do is how companies can execute well to capture the opportunity, and I think which is there.
I would just say, Nichole, to maybe the senior level talent out there that's interested in this space, due to maybe some of the stereotypes that's been around from recent years, don't assume that an opportunity isn't worth considering. Don't go into it with a pessimistic view. Go into it with an optimistic view to understand. Also, I think it's important for individuals who haven't considered a private equity opportunity to really take the opportunity to look at the investment thesis of a private equity in the portfolio. It's been really impressive to see that some of these private equity firms have taken it and bringing on board industry advisors, in other words, industry executives who understand the space to advise them on their investments and go-to-market strategies. And private equity firms that do that, in my experience so far, are the ones that are successful with the acquisition and growing the portfolio.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you taking the time today to talk all things biostimulants with me. And thanks so much to our listeners for joining us on the Charles Aris podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Charles Aris podcast. For more insights and resources, visit us at www.charlesaris.com. We'll see you next time.